For months, rumors have been swirling about Vladimir Putin. Specifically, is he still alive? A cascade of news reports and social media about this question started in October of 2023. According to a mysterious Russian Telegram channel called General SVR, a prominent Russian political analyst named Valery Solovey runs it, said that he died on Thursday, October 26th. The Putin, he says, that we see now is a body double, a doppelganger, who Solovey claims has been filling in for the sickly Putin for several months. A few Russian or Western analysts believe that Solovey and General SVR is reputable, but the question is it true? And a bigger question is, does it matter? Curiously, one of the things that has been circulating since late last year, and as ridiculous as this may sound to folks like you who follow very carefully and closely what's going on in Russia, there are those who are proposing that Vladimir Putin died last October. And, that to me just doesn't seem plausible. But, in speaking with you recently, you said something very interesting about whether this is true or not. What are your thoughts about that situation?
Well, what I told you then is that that really, honestly, I do not care. I mean that Putin has, or he, how to say it, that Putin, if his legacy is alive and if he is alive in public, then there's no really difference whether it is this Putin or some other Putin who is in picture, because he is kept alive, because it is his legacy. So he's needed, and he is strong enough to be in power in this form. So I do think that actually the relation of Putin with his society, that they are very tight, and they are also a bit complicated, because if you see that what Putin is kind of personalizing, he's personalizing the great Russia thinking and the great Держава. And we can't say that he's alone. I think that rather he's impersonalization of something very deep in Russian society and something very deep in Russian mind. That for Russians, if you say democracy, then democracy for them means something totally different than for people in West. Democracy is the awful time in the beginning of 90s, without any rules or the rules of money, and close to anarchy. So it's nothing really very positive to them. And coming through all the humiliation they thought they had in 90s and early 2000s, then the rhetoric, what has very much resonated in Russian society, is that it is Putin who went to restore the Держава, the military power of Russia, and to heal all the humiliations. And I think that this has pretty good resonance in the whole society, that the only pride that they have is twofold. It is root power, root military power, and second, it is that they are different from the West, that what is gay Europa, how they say it, like the rotten West, where just same-sex marriages mean that it will be extinct in some time, and it is just a true Christian values they preserve.
Just very quickly, I want to ask you again about Putin. Do you have any idea or thoughts about whether these reports about him possibly being dead, or is there any truth at all to them based on what you know?
I don't know. I mean that there has been, you know better than me how many different theories there are, starting from the from a comparison of a shape of his ears and and so on. So I do not know, but when it is necessary that he is alive, it means that he is alive. So
All
it
right.
whether it is this Putin, I don't really care because it is the Putin.
When you think about that, what comes to mind?
We don't think about that. We think about, the unfortunately, but in these sort of in the circumstances we live in, we just look at what we have to do and what our plans and objectives are. We know that Russia, and one thing I would like to stress, it doesn't matter, like Putin is not all of Russia. Okay, so it's not really correct to sort of blame everything that is happening on Putin alone, and to think that, if Putin goes or stays, that it will have any considerable impact. Russia is a terrorist state because 87% of their population, apparently, even though it's a sham elections and whatever, but a huge amount of Russian people are endorsing terrorism, which makes them complicit in terrorism, which means that if Putin goes tomorrow, whatever happens to him, he dies or he's abducted by aliens, there will still be millions and millions of Russians who are war criminals in their hearts and minds. Some of them are killing us on the battlefield, but others are condoning, endorsing, and actually rejoicing in these acts of terrorism from the safety of their homes in Russia. And we will not allow them to do that.
What does 6 more years at least of Vladimir Putin mean for the world?
It means Russia will continue to be an aggressive country abroad, seeking to rebuild its empire, and an oppressive country at home, including murdering dissidents and political opposition. It's a mess. It's a problem for the world, and we need to take that seriously. It's not going to get better by itself.
In between Russia and all of its ambitions is this problem called Ukraine, problem to them. And it's definitely what they're doing there is a problem to the rest of the world, but I just use that term and I don't use it loosely. Russia wanted to essentially absorb Ukraine easily and then move on to its next ambitions. But they weren't able to do that. Ukraine has found itself in a situation where it had a lot of support before. Now some of that support's going away, and even the U.S. is sitting there sort of twiddling its thumbs about what to do. How does that impact all of this for Ukraine?
Well, I'd have to unpack what you said. First of all, you're right that Putin looks at Ukraine as properly belonging to Russia. He's made that clear. I mean, go no further than his long, long interview with Tucker Carlson, where he gave this version of Russian history that eliminates Ukraine as a separate nation. For his version of history, Ukraine can't exist. The Ukrainians differ. They're fighting. They're fighting for their lives. They're fighting for their country. And they have stopped Vladimir Putin. Putin, you're right again, wants to continue. It's the Russian propaganda, if you pay attention, has targeted Moldova, which was a piece of Romania they ripped away at the end of the Second World War. They are after Moldova, which is now and has been an independent country, but they're after it. And I don't doubt that if they thought they could get away with it, they would go take a piece of the Baltic countries, which have also been independent since the fall of the Soviet Union. And we never recognized their occupation by Moscow. So you're right, Putin has more adventures. He won't stop until he is stopped. But I'm not sure I agree that some of the support for Ukraine has faded. The French have gotten stronger. President Macron has talked about the need to do more for Ukraine and to take the Russian threat seriously. The Germans, despite mixed rhetoric, have done a lot. the Poles are doing a tremendous amount, and their support for Ukraine continues, even though they've got some differences with Ukraine about agriculture. The problem, and you weren't wrong to talk about a problem, is in the United States. We're the leader of the free world, and yet you have a large part of the Republican Party, including Donald Trump, who don't care about Ukraine, who are more or less on Putin's side and have said so, whether they make sophisticated strategic arguments that China is the real problem and we ought to ignore Ukraine or let Russia have it, or dumb arguments like Tucker Carlson saying that Moscow is a great country. Sounds like one of the leftist idiots that used to parade to Moscow back in the 1930s. But support among what used to be the party of Ronald Reagan has slipped a lot. The Trumpites don't believe in the free world, apparently. They don't believe in support for Ukraine, and they don't believe in American leadership of the free world. They believe in carving up countries between strongmen, and the people in them be damned. That's as much as I can figure out Trump's worldview. So that's a problem. And it is shocking to me that the United States, that has led the free world and done a pretty good job of it, despite all our hypocrisies, blunders, stupidities, and my list is long. Despite all of that, we've done a pretty reasonable job since 1945. And Ukraine is a place we need to keep working to help the Ukrainian people defeat one of America's foes, and to do so without sending American forces. No US boys at risk. But we need to step up, and the Congress, that is to say, the Republicans in the House of Representatives, and to be more precise, Mike Johnson, apparently under orders from Trump, is blocking assistance to people who don't want us to fight for them. They only want the tools to fight for themselves. So I'm sorry to go on at length, but you asked a serious question and I had to unpack the answer.
What are your thoughts about Vladimir Putin getting 6 more years in power in Russia? What does that mean for Russia, for Estonia, Ukraine, Europe, and the rest of the world?
Yeah, I first to say that there is nobody who would say that they really were elections. That of course they were not, and there has been also discussion why Putin at all needed this kind of show around him. But I think that what he needed was to cement his legacy inside and also outside Russia. He did it without any hint of being democratic or being fair or free, but nevertheless, the show was there. And I think that what it means for Russia inside, the picture is quite grim. That what we can predict is that the regime gets more autocratic, and that even the limited type of some freedoms what preserved in Russia, they are going to be limited further. I don't think that inside Russia we can also predict any kind of protest against it. What we see rather there is that first that the official approval to Putin is huge, but I'm pretty convinced that even in unofficial form, it is still pretty big because people inside Russia simply do not see any alternative to Putin. It was very interesting was the one of the recent polls of Levada, where the Levada is the research center inside Russia who still conducts polls, and widely they are mostly respected and trusted. And so they also asked the questions from people about the future of Russia. And the tragic picture is that the people inside Russia do not see any future. They just see that it is kind of abortion of future, that tomorrow is today, that there's no difference, that in 30 years, what will happen in 30 years? 30 years, Putin will reign. Well, in human reasoning, it's not possible. Well, it doesn't matter. Then it is another person who is just Putin. So there is no there is no vision that there is a way out of the situation what is at hand today. As for outside, I think that this year will be crucial in the sense of Russian war in Ukraine, and I think that the so-called elections give Putin all the means and all the freedom he needs to really to make a big effort to win this war.
Talking to people in other places, one of the problems, as you mentioned, this Russian or Putin or Kremlin view of the West is what they call gay Ropa. There is also this view of the West not being very intelligent, not being very together or cohesive when it comes to countering and fighting back against Russian aggression. What is the global South saying? What are other people from other places saying about what's happening in the West?
Well, yeah, I can see that what has been my impression and my experience, and it is the really the quite widespread conviction that West is very weak, quarreling between themselves, not being convinced the core democratic values themselves, and thus that the rate of hypocrisy is overwhelming. So the mistrust, and even I would say what I can feel in some countries, even hatred, is quite astonishing. So I do think that we really need to talk much more and to really to turn attention to what is said about us. But I also think that it is very important that we talk much more among ourselves, and that we really turn attention to what impression it is, what we live like outside, to live to other region of globe, because at the moment this picture is not nice. And if we ourselves are not really convinced in what we say, then I think that it is better to say less, but to show with actions that in what we believe.
Eeva, why do you think people from these nations are saying the things that they're saying about the West? What gives them the reason to do that? Is it possibly propaganda? Is it possibly just that much dislike for people in the West?
I think that there are roots in many different places, and when we speak, for instance, about Russia, then they are convinced that, I mean, if for instance to say that the elections in Russia were neither fair nor free, they say that what's the difference? You do the same. Just look at the last elections in the US; they were rigged. So, but you still play some kind of democracy. If we speak with, for instance, people from India, then to some extent it deep hatred toward colonialism and toward the period of toward the colonistic period, and feeling that it's not healed, that the West is obliged to do far more to get over it. If we come closer, then the recent conflict in Gaza has just provoked a new wave in saying that West is just hypocritical. That when it comes to Ukraine, then we say about sufferings of people. If we come to Gaza, then even if it is more and more on the table, then we are accused that we do not turn attention to horrible sufferings in Gaza to the same extent as we do the sufferings in Ukraine. So it is on many. There are many routes, but I would say that that most of them go back far to history. And I think that we should know our history far better than we do at the moment to just understand where it comes from. And if we understand the roots, it's far easier to understand and to heal it.
What is it that needs to be done, in your opinion, to get those on board in the U.S. that haven't seemed to have figured out that letting Ukraine lose means all of Europe loses, and by extension, the U.S.? What needs to be done for those folks in the U.S. to help them get this calculus?
Well, I don't know what key will unlock that door, but I was recently, in fact, I've been in Poland twice this year already, and I've urged the Poles, particularly the Poles, the right-wing Poles that were in the previous government that got along decently with Donald Trump. I met with a lot of them and encouraged them to come to Washington and reach out to their Republican friends and the Trump people and tell them, look, we're on the right, just like you, but we believe in the free world. We believe in supporting Ukraine. We believe that Vladimir Putin is a menace. We believe in NATO. And those Polish right-wingers do believe in all of those things. They're not like the Hungarian right-wingers who seem to be on Putin's side. Now, the president of Poland was in Washington last week. He is from the Polish political right, and he met with Mike Johnson. And I imagine he did his best, and I hope he got through to Mike Johnson. But I'm encouraging anybody I can find who works with the Republicans to go over to Washington and work on them some more and explain that this is in the interest of the free world in general and the US in particular. I know the British Tories, the Conservative Party, sent a delegation to Washington recently. Some of my colleagues at the Atlantic Council supported it. So I'm doing what I can. But I tell you, I don't know what key will unlock this, but we need to keep pushing and making clear what's at stake.
When you look at where we stand right now with Vladimir Putin in power in Russia, continuing to do what he does, put into context for us how much we lose each day by having an individual like him in power, doing the kinds of things that he does each day.
Peace in Europe, security in Europe isn't just for idealists. It's good for the American bottom line. In the post-World War II peace, Americans made lots and lots of money working with Europe. And if we want to deal effectively with the Chinese challenge, we need Europe working with us, which means we have to deal not with just the Chinese problem, but the Russia problem as well. And we may not want to deal with two problems at once, but two problems we've got, and it's not going to do any good to hide our head in the sand. The free world is a good thing to support, not because it's charity, but because it helps American interests. We figured that out for the first time 100 years ago and put it into practice in 1945, and we did awfully well. Of a world where values and the rule of law is generally supported is good for America. It's good for our business. Putin wants to destroy all that. He wants a closed empire. He wants repression. He wants war and chaos. We don't. The American vision of a free world-based system, we used to call it the free world. Now we call it something like the rules-based order or some such. I prefer the free world. That's good for everybody, even for the Russians, although it's not very good for Kremlin and the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin. It's good for us. It's not charity. It's good for the bottom line.